Max Verstappen claims a shock sprint qualifying pole position at the United States Grand Prix as Red Bull grab all the headlines both on and, controversially, off the circuit. From Racing News 365, my name is Nick Golding and I'm delighted to be joined, as always, by lead editor Ian Parks. Ian, Max finally on pole in some form for the first time in a very long time. But we're not even going to start with that because the big story this weekend at the Circuit of the Americas has been Red Bull. It kind of started this story, which I'll let you explain on Thursday, but it's really on Friday at the circuit where the story has built. The FIA have gotten involved. It led to a quite remarkable piece of camera work by Sky Sports F1, which again, I'll let you explain. But Red Bull, the teams in the paddock seem to be against them. They're coming under fire, but Christian Horner was very defiant that Red Bull are not doing anything illegal.
Paranoia was the word that Red Bull team principal Christian Horner used, and you can kind of understand his argument behind that because he pointed out that this issue seems to have stemmed only recently, despite the fact that what we're now going to talk about has actually been deployed within the car, he estimates, for about the last 3 seasons. So I'll try and précis this as quickly as possible. I know usually I'm prone to talking just a little bit too much on occasion, but I'll do my very best to summarize. So basically, we are talking about a ride height adjuster mechanism within the RB20. Now, that is situated, basically the ride height we're talking about here is what's known as the T-tray, the bib, and to give it another phrase, which is at the front and in the middle of the floor of the car. The ride height is significant because the lower the ride height for a car during qualifying, the more downforce it generates, the faster it can go, which is obviously crucial for a single lap. However, a car laden with fuel, 100 kilograms for the start of a Grand Prix, that ride height naturally could do with being much higher to ensure the ground clearance. Now, whilst adjustments can be made to cars quite naturally over the course of a Grand Prix weekend, what you cannot do is make those adjustments during Parc Fermé. That is the period of time over a Grand Prix weekend when the cars cannot be touched at all by any mechanic other than for driver comfort should there be any issue with the cockpit, the driver's seat, etc. So why has this all of a sudden come to light? Well, it appears that following the Singapore Grand Prix, one team in particular, and we believe it was McLaren, according to the FIA, had a little moan about this mechanism within the Red Bull car, kind of indicating that it's being deployed within Parc Fermé conditions. What we saw quite clearly and quite remarkably, thanks to the excellent camera work of Sky Sports F1, although part of me also wonders just how much it was also staged for the cameras, were 2 FIA scrutineers in the garage with Max Verstappen's RB20. His mechanic, his front-end mechanic, had got the front plate open on the nose, on the top of the nose of the car, and they could be seen going into the nose with screwdrivers, with long extensions, magnetic screwdrivers as well, to get to the area where they can change this ride height mechanism. So quite clearly, it's a very complicated area to get to. One of the points that was made by McLaren CEO Zak Brown was, why is Red Bull the only team to have this mechanism in that particular place? Because it's one of those areas that might not be picked up by the cameras in the garage during Parc Fermé because of how difficult it is to access, and you can't see what they're doing because they might just be doing something to help with driver comfort. So it's all a load of shenanigans. As Christian Horner pointed out, and I'll use the word again, he said it's paranoia on behalf of McLaren, but it's just that F1 game, isn't it? teams trying to get a bit of one-upmanship, trying to disrupt their rivals, throw them off kilter coming into a weekend, and in particular, Red Bull, as we know, has struggled quite late of late with regard to its results. It's been overtaken in the Constructors' Championship. Max Verstappen's lead has come down from 84 points to 52 to Lando Norris. However, I'll leave you with the words of the FIA single-seater director, Nicholas Tombazis, because he was caught for a very quick interview just before the sprint qualifying started. And he basically turned around and said, the FIA has played its part, has done everything it possibly can now to get on top of this issue. And right now, as far as the FIA is concerned, it is no longer a story. It is a non-story.
And what's really interesting is you've got both Christian Horner and Dr. Helmut Marko, the Red Bull advisor, stressing it is not illegal. They're within the regulations, but both of them also saying that perhaps this is teams just trying to take a bit of the fire, a bit of the media pressure away from them, and obviously a bit of a slice shot at McLaren. Of course, whilst yes, Red Bull has come under scrutiny for this ride height adjustable device, actually McLaren has also been facing a lot of scrutiny and has had to make changes, of course, to its rear wing this season.
Not just this season, but coming into this weekend.
Yeah.
As I say, it's all part of this game because, of course, we had this mini DRS issue that came to light during the Azerbaijan Grand Prix weekend. And there was a lot of furore made about that, in particular from Red Bull, of course. McLaren, according to McLaren, without FIA interference, it decided to calm the waters, shall we say, by making adjustments to the rear wing. Now, the rear wing that appeared in Baku was only ever going to appear again in Las Vegas because of the nature of the circuits. Bearing in mind, different circuits require different rear wings. However, what we have learned now, coming into this weekend, is that McLaren has decided to make changes to all of its rear wings. So, as I say, this is that tit for tat kind of thing, isn't it? Red Bull complaining about the rear wings on McLaren, McLaren complaining about this ride height adjustment system on the Red Bull. As I say, it's all part of the nature of the game. When you've got two teams going head for head for, in their eyes, what is a very prestigious constructors title, and it's only 41 points between these two teams, a lot still to play for, a lot still to happen. Although if the sprint qualifying situation is anything to go by, bearing in mind what happened to Max and Checo not making it into SQ3, then it looks like Red Bull is continuing to only fight with one hand tied behind its back, effectively, or one driver certainly at the forefront of that particular fight, that of course being Max Verstappen. So yes, a lot of politicizing off track going on, but that's simply all part of the nature of the Formula One game, just trying to gain that advantage, just trying to unsettle your opponent as much as possible. And it's having its desired effect, and it's giving us plenty to talk about and write about, of course, which is what we love.
Even at 1 a.m. in the morning for Ian and I in the United Kingdom. Hence why our voices are a little bit quieter than normal. That's purely because we're both actually respecting our households. Because if anybody gets woken up, then that's and screams at both of us. Before we talk about, obviously, the on-track action, because it's been a really peculiar day, a reminder to those who are not already subscribed to the Racing News 365 channel, please do so, because my maths has gone wrong, more than 90% of you, are currently not subscribed. Please do so, because we have got a giveaway going on at the moment. If you are subscribed to the channel, we're giving away 10 F1 caps and 10 F1 scale model cars. To enter, just subscribe. It is as simple as that. And going back to the on-track action, it almost seems poetic that given all the scrutiny and all the eyes on Red Bull over today and yesterday, it just seemed right for Max Verstappen to go and claim sprint pole. Something I don't think any of us really predicted, but it's been a weird day being the sprint format. Only the one practice session, of course. That means a lot of teams with their upgrades, not enough time to really dial them in, understand the data from them. And it was Max who came out on top, but only just.
0.012 seconds to another surprise, Mercedes George Russell. The way things were looking, Ferrari were looking really good coming out of practice. They looked strong in SQ1, strong in SQ2. But of course, we're talking SQ1, SQ2, they only run medium tyres. That's the difference between sprint qualifying and main qualifying. Of course, main qualifying, you can use softs throughout, but in SQ1 and SQ2, you're only allowed the mediums. And as I say, Ferrari looking very good, very positive, and it looked like they were probably going to hold sway. Lewis Hamilton also went really well in the first two portions of sprint qualifying, but then SQ3, you're allowed to put the softs on, and that's when Max Verstappen really came to the fore. And it's his first time on a pole position. And yes, I know it's not a Grand Prix pole position, but we're going to use the phrase pole position. First time on a pole position for 6 months. 6 months. That's how long Max has gone without starting from the front row of the grid, going back to the Emilia-Romagna Grand Prix in mid-May. So that's quite something for Max. It's like almost unheard of when you think of the dominance that he's had over these past 2.5 years, effectively, to now all of a sudden finally be back on the front row of the grid, or top spot on the grid again. But he loves this track. He absolutely loves this track. He loves the sprint as much as he hates it behind the scenes. And, he's won all 3 sprints so far this season. He's now in pole position to make it 4. And of course, he absolutely loves the Circuit of the Americas, because this is a circuit where he's won the last 3 Grand Prix. So it's a great start for Max. 52-point lead over Lando Norris, of course. Lando only down in 4th position.
Yeah.
McLaren coming in with a raft of upgrades for this Grand Prix. And it seems that with only that one practice session, they've not been able to get a firm handle on those upgrades as yet. The end of practice, we saw Lando running with one half of his car smothered, the left-hand side of his car smothered with Flovis paint. So clearly, McLaren were doing all they could at that particular stage to try and get a read on these upgrades. But yeah, it's just not played into their hands so far. A little bit of a struggle on them with regard to McLaren. So yeah, Max first, Lando 4th. It's only a few points, of course. That's, if they finished in those positions, it's only going to be 3 points difference. But bearing in mind that Lando Norris needs to eat away continually at that advantage that Max has, it's not where he quite obviously wants to be going into sprint qualifying. Going to the sprint race, should I say.
Yeah. And of course, it's more important that because actually, with Max being on pole for the sprints, it's a little confidence booster. It's a bit of almost a little swing of the momentum a little bit, because McLaren, of course, another team that have come into this weekend with upgrades. And interestingly, Lando actually, when asked if his disappointing performance was due to upgrades, actually said that it's not that different from the package they had beforehand. He was obviously upset, complaining about the balance and the setup. But something that was really interesting, you mentioned a few minutes ago on how Sergio Perez, of course, was knocked out in SQ2, will start the sprint in P11. So you've got Red Bull again fighting with one driver. It's the same for McLaren, at least in the sprint race, because Oscar Piastri, knocked out in the first part, will start P16 due to losing his best lap after exceeding track limits. So actually, Lando, if he wants to ensure that Max doesn't increase his lead by 2 or 3 points, Lando's got to fight by himself. He's not going to have his wingman, to support him.
No, obviously Max hasn't got his wingman either, but it's hardly any great surprise. I was going to say he's become very accustomed to that over the course of this season, hasn't he? Given what the way Checo Perez has struggled, and again, you got to think for Sergio, he's unable to get into Q3 in qualifying on Saturday to be in a good position for the Grand Prix. You got to think that this is going to be another, not a nail in his coffin, but another real chipping away at that confidence of retaining his seat for next season. But of course, that's a whole bigger picture to look at right now. Yes, I appreciate we're looking at sprint qualifying and the sprint race. And as you say, Max without Checo, Lando's got nowhere, doesn't have Oscar anywhere near him. So yes, it's very much game on. And of course, Lando's got to fight his way past George Russell and of course Charles Leclerc on the second row alongside him, of course.
Absolutely. And just to quickly run through the top 10 for the sprint race on Saturday, which obviously happens before the traditional qualifying. It's been a weird weekend already, and it's only, Saturday morning for us too. It's obviously Max Verstappen on pole with George Russell in second, Leclerc and Norris on the second row, Carlos Sainz and Nico Hulkenberg on the third row, Lewis Hamilton in 7th, Kevin Magnussen in 8th, a double Haas appearance in SQ3, brilliant performance by the American team. P9 for Yuki Tsunoda ahead of Sergio Perez. Is that going to add some more pressure on Perez? And then Franco Colapinto in P10. Ian, something's been really interesting, just a final little talking point, because obviously Ferrari and Mercedes have both looked very, very good on the opening day, but what's been really interesting is that for the first time in a few rounds, Red Bull, McLaren, Ferrari and Mercedes have all shown really competitive times. Of course, sprint qualifying was extraordinarily close in SQ1, SQ2 and SQ3. It does feel like this weekend is kind of simmering nicely to be one of fine margins, and that, as we saw with Oscar, the smallest of errors, and it was a very, very small error to have his lap time deleted. It does feel like one of those weekends where actually huge gains can be made from just not making the smallest of mistakes.
Yeah, huge gains as well, bearing in mind the plethora of upgrades that all these cars are sporting. Ferrari have come into this weekend still pretty much looking at the package that they had in Singapore, and that looks now as if it's working well for them. Red Bull, as you mentioned, have come with a new floor. In Max Verstappen's hands, that RB20 once again has come alive. McLaren, as we've just discussed, has got all its upgrades on that car. It's going to take, you think, this weekend and probably most definitely the practice sessions ahead of the Mexico City Grand Prix next weekend, you feel for them to get a true understanding. And Mercedes as well has come with a new raft of upgrades. Now, for Lewis, practice was poor. He was really unhappy, in particular with how things turned around. Then, once again, we had a night and day difference. But in this case, for Lewis, it worked in his favour. Changes were made between practice and sprint qualifying, and he came out and delivered the goods for the most part until, and we'll just touch on Lewis in particular, because fine margins, and I've just actually written an article on this. He was on course. He delivered a cracking first sector time on the soft tyres in SQ3. Franco Colapinto, you mentioned, had just had a spin out of turn 12. Lewis coming up behind, momentarily the light panels changed from green to yellow and then back to green again within almost like a matter of seconds. That was enough for Lewis to lift off the throttle. As it changed back to green, he then got back on the throttle, braked a little bit too late going into turn 12, and that lost his momentum. It's literally those fine margins that you talk about that Oscar Piastri had as well. But for something like that literally that split second, that light panel turning to yellow for Lewis, he could have been on pole position. He believes it because, as I say, he was so far ahead, given the time that he'd posted, that he, as I say, this is what happens, isn't it? You know, it's you can't call it sometimes, but as we got a fascinating weekend coming up now.
Yeah.
Qualifying should be equally as lively. Should be a good sprint race as well. Although obviously with Max on pole, you got to think he's going to make it 4 in a row for the sprint wins this season, and it's then a question of can Lando Norris limit the damage and reduce the number of points deficit that could be taken out of him. So we'll have to wait and see.
So on that note, to finish things up, bold prediction time, and of course, is a sprint weekend, so we've got to do too. Ian, what is your bold prediction for the sprint race and also for qualifying? I'll give you a second. I'll go first. I think it's not really bold, but I think, I see Max winning the sprint race. I just think he's actually looked pretty comfortable across practice and sprint qualifying, whereas others, obviously Lewis had a high speed spin in FP1, was lucky to get away with it, and I think even the McLarenists look a little unsettled. As for main qualifying, you mentioned him just that I think Lewis, if he can get a clean lap in, he's looked quick. I think Lewis will be the man to watch in qualifying. What are your bold predictions?
I'm going to go for a sprint race. I'm going to go for Franco Colapinto, who starts 10th, getting a point at least. I think,
of course, only for the top 8 in the sprint, for those who are unaware.
That's what I'm saying, from 10th to 8th. So I think he's going to get a recovery. Point. He's looked superb. This was his first sprint weekend. So first time at the Circuit of the Americas, and he manages to get into SQ3. Yes, he made a mistake in SQ3, unfortunately for him. Who knows where he could have been, but he's looked really good so far. continuing the form that he showed over the 3 Grand Prix since he's been pitched into that Williams seat following Logan Sargent's sacking. Looked tremendous, and he's just continued that form. So I'm going to go for Franco for a point in the sprint race. As for qualifying, I'm gonna go. I think McLaren are gonna be able to pull out the bag, and I'm gonna go for. I think it's going to be a Max Lando front row.
Interesting. Well, of course, those who are watching this F1 update, be sure to let us know your bold predictions in the comment section below. We'd love to see them. And of course, it was brilliant to see some of you getting involved after the podcast and giving us your predictions. So the rest of you, come on, give us your bold predictions. This has been the Post Friday USGP F1 update from Ian and myself. We will see you after the sprint race and after qualifying on Saturday. See you later.
Take care, folks.